Hello and welcome to Perennial Podcast episode 15. I'm here with Ken again. How you doing, Ken?
Very well. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty well, but I think that people are kind of down. And I'm gauging that by the attitude I've seen, particularly from Nick. I think Nick is a good barometer of where things are. And he's usually pretty high energy. I've just noticed this kind of sullen realization that maybe past foibles have like we talked about before, really cut off a lot of options. And yeah, I think the mood is gloom overall, and I don't like that. But I also, it's what I would predict, because this kind of laissez-faire, media-driven framework is just not compatible with ultimate aims and ends. So, let's see. I don't think anybody's here yet to check on the audio, because we had that issue at the end of the last stream. Hopefully everything's working. Usually at least have a couple people in. So if you're there, then go ahead and let us know in the chat if the audio is working. But anyway, under the presumption that it is working, I wanted to talk about what we ended with last time, which is organizational structure. So there are certain advantages to being distributed, to being a dispersed network of loosely interconnected nodes, because that is resilient to most forms of attack. But the problem is that the media that we're using, the medium of the distributed set of nodes that entails the dissident right overall, that medium itself may be fragile with censorship. So that kind of defeats the purpose of being distributed. And what being organized allows for is consolidated attention given to concentrated goals. And legal efforts aid from having this sort of organization, lobbying particular companies, and that we can't do that the way things are now. Certain groups may be able to. I know, TRS has things that they're doing. Different groups have things that they're doing. But as far as I can tell, it's really not. We lack an organizational structure that would serve a number of purposes. And I just wanted to define some of those points, like what is necessary, what do we need, as opposed to this just media-driven, try and get likes and views and hopefully Patreon donations. And I just want to drill home, that is not going to lead anywhere. This is not a successful strategy. And even the intellectual stuff, it's useful, but there are a few things that any organization needs. First and foremost, the number one job of organizational structure is distribution of the executive function. In any organization, we identify people who are better at making decisions, and then we give those people deliberation over decision making for others. And this just makes sense. I have used this argument in the context of a marriage or any interpersonal relationship, like a romantic relationship. If one party is overall more intelligent and deals with decision making better, they by default should just be given that authority to make decisions. And the benefit goes both ways. See, if you have someone who's better at making decisions for you, then the benefit there is obvious. On the flip side, if you're making decisions for someone else, you effectively can double the hours available. And that's what is the benefit of distributing the executive function? It's allocating time efficiently. We have scarce resources of time, and in a laissez-faire setting, in a libertarian setting, each node decides on their own how they want to use their time. But then the things that they're looking at are, how does it make me feel? It's biochemical signals primarily. And then maybe like their own personal interests. But there are certain solutions that you're just not able to think about from that vantage point. Whereas if one person is planning for 500 people, they might make different financial decisions that ultimately are more beneficial and save people money. Hopefully that's clear what I was saying. But yeah, how to use time. So that's number one. That's what a community, rather an organizational structure has to do. Another is information gathering. So, as it is now, people have their own interests, and the information that they get through reading is shared through this media-driven platform. So people share ideas that they found compelling, and it kind of moves up, although it often moves down as well, moves up through the commentators until we have like 5 or 6 people who most people listen to. Like I guess the Pareto 80-20 kind of rule fits in here, where a small number of content producers are heard by the majority of people out there. And those people kind of reiterate the points that we've en masse aggregated. So that's our process of information gathering. And it's, acceptable, but it's highly aleatory. It's stochastic. It's based on chance, and it's not able to redirect attention and search for information. So, that goes hand in hand with the executive function. You need a higher agency to be able to look at the long term, to look at the effects of how this information affects mobs, not just the individual and his interests. And they need to then search for particular lines of inquiry that the individual just wouldn't look after for themselves. So to review, number 1, distribution of the executive function. Number 2, information gathering. Number 3 is information processing. And this happens through conversations as it is now, but these conversations are not rigorous. Even when we have forums devoted, like we set up a little forum, really Ken did. Ken set up a forum for this audience to discuss various topics, and that's useful, definitely good, better to have something than nothing. But the problem there is that people aren't really obligated to provide feedback on any particular set of signals. And any system, if it wants to improve, has to process feedback. So this is, we get information, and then we process it through conversation, through each of our own analysis. But there's no centralizing mechanism. There's no CPU currently, the way we organize our communications. And that I've kind of talked about before as obligations to do presentations, obligations to provide feedback. It's really just a game framework where you set up a certain number of required tasks per week, per month, whatever it is. And that can be a self-modifying kind of thing. So distribution of the executive function, information gathering, information processing, and constellation of interests. Any organizational structure has to provide a constellation of interests, usually material interests. For a corporation, it's profit, because everyone in the company benefits from the company growing in wealth. It makes your job more secure, and hopefully you can get a raise out of it. So that's the constellation of interest, material interest. Now, in lieu of having an actual corporate structure, all you can really provide is a constellation of intellectual interest, which points to some kind of academic type model. And given that the university system, public education, is the biggest threat to traditional society, to our way of life, it's one of the leading propagandists for the left, we have to provide an alternative to that. And then last is kind of segueing into the various social benefits that and roles that this needs to fulfill, which is persistent communication. We make decisions based on how we feel about people. It's all very ephemeral. It's all very emotional. And we stop communicating with people just because we don't feel like communicating. And in a military chain of command, that obviously wouldn't work. In order for signals to be processed, in order for information to reach the top, in order for the executive function to be effectively redistributed, there has to be a rhythm to the processing of signals. And this is what happens in the brain as well. As soon as that rhythm is disrupted, there's like an entanglement of information, it seems, through multiple iterations of this processing and an action-oriented kind of cybernetic deal. And yeah, right now we have like waves, things move in patterns like a lot of activity one week and not very much the next, and that there's like information that can give you. But my own feeling is that this leaves the system pretty fragile to like collective loss of progress, loss of momentum, and continually reshifting identity, which again has some potential benefit in that you can't all be attacked at once. But as I pointed out at the beginning, this is not actually the case, because we can all be attacked at once because of the media of the distributed network. The internet is censorable. All of the things that we rely on, hosting, servers, domain names, social media, everything that we use currently is in the hands of the technocrats and can be taken away. So no matter how dispersed we are on the internet, we don't really gain in terms of resilience or durability. So in light of that, I think the overwhelming benefits of having a formal organizational structure outweigh the perceived kind of instability of it. But so it looks like a few people are here then watching, and I'd like to make sure that Ken's audio is working. I know we had problems with that last time. So what are your thoughts, Ken? And also in the chat, let us know if his audio is working.
Yeah, I've been having a tough internet connection today, so things have been choppy. They've cleared up recently, but I'm trying to look at the chat right now, and I don't check that out. We also, I don't know if we wanted to shift gears. It says works sehr gut, so Dankeschön. Clunky, Haken, Thaster. Got some funny names. Yeah, I think basically part of the ethos behind this podcast is, doing it on a regular basis, having regularity about it according to a planned schedule, a long-term plan. And you think about, we just had the anniversary of Charlottesville, right? So he goes to DC and he held a protest. And surprisingly, it wasn't as bad as it theoretically could have been. I think the worst possible, people showing up, you get organizations showing up, you get, the NSM or someone like that showing up, and then people saying, oh, look, this is who these people are. Instead, it was like Jason Kessler, a Hispanic guy, a black guy, and they went out there and they didn't really give the left the bait that they wanted. They didn't really give them the boogeyman that they wanted. And so that was, I guess, the most successful thing you could have done, barring doing nothing at all. And maybe it was better than doing nothing at all, because I think it had nothing been done, it would have just looked like, oh, these people are cowards. They're too scared to be in the public space or something. So I guess it was probably the best thing that could have happened. But you look at just the span of 1 year, and in terms of we talk about the corporate world, the business world, and you're trying to write a book, trying to create any work of art or a work of literature or an empirical work of science. When we talk about the span of a year is not a huge chunk of time. I mean, a year is a reasonable amount of time in which to plan an activity, to execute that plan, and then at the end of it, you can regroup, reevaluate. But when you think about the last year, I mean, the alt-right, for example, it's changed dramatically, the tone, the tenor, everything that's going on, and people, the kind of activities that people engage in now are radically different from what was projected as the goal a year ago. A year ago it was like, we want to get as many people in the street as possible, and now thankfully people are saying, no, that's really not what we should be doing. We should be networking. But again, what is the public face? What is I think part of the perceived advantage of saying we're going to have a street fighting movement or something was that you could see like the results, the explicit visual results of an action. You can see, okay, we have this video, we can look at these different figures, we can look at the numbers of people and so on. We can look at arrest records. Like it's very concrete, something you can grasp onto. Now it's like, what's going on? Well, maybe there's some stuff going on behind the scenes, perhaps, but that's a lot less. And that's based off this kind of instant gratification of, we're sharing memes, we're laughing, we're watching street fights, we're getting this vicarious rush from that. When that's what it's based off of, it really does have to be something like a street fighting movement, but of course that's not viable. So if you want something that's viable, if you want something that's well thought out, methodical, and planned and intelligent, it cannot be based on simply, and it's not to say you can't enjoy what you're doing, but it can't be a purely comedy hour and WWE street fighting. Like, it has to be a little more low time preference, and that basically necessitates having a group of people where you are doing things on a regular schedule, and you're not doing them when you want to do it or when it feels good or when it strikes your fancy, but you have to do it, you have to commit. And I think the most basic first level is just participating. It can be a round table, it can be an open discussion, but yeah, eventually planning requires some kind of hierarchy. I mean,
right. Before you go on, I want to comment on one issue that was just raised. Are you hearing me? Okay. So I think what happens is people who should have executive authority project on the rest of people the fact that they operate better when they're motivated by their own interests. And that is normal for the aristocratic element, right? Aristocratic people have their own drive. They have a drive to learn. They have a drive to create. And they do it best when they feel the inspiration to do it. But most people aren't that way. Even like high IQ, 120, 130 IQ often people just work better on a fixed schedule. So Nassim Taleb, Anti-Fragile, I'm reading that. I'm actually listening to it, but it's the full version. So he talks about how he doesn't like to be confined to a schedule and the benefit of not planning. And I think he's right in the audience that he's addressing, which is like, high income business types and creative types. Like, they need that. That's what the aristocracy is supposed to have. But the error is in projecting that down to how everyone else operates. Because most people, the average person, feels a lot more comfortable and satisfied if they have particular goals to achieve at particular times. I don't know if we're delayed between each other. Are you, Yep, so I'm not sure what's going on there. But yeah, that is, I think, why we make this miscalculation. Yeah. Okay, so Ken, can you hear me now? I know you can't see my. Okay, I can't hear Ken now. I knew we would have technical issues. I'm not hearing
Oh,
Ken.
whoops.
So there he
I'm
is.
currently having a better time hearing you on my phone screen than doing it from my laptop. So I'm kind of switching back and forth here.
Yeah,
Not
and I turned off
sure.
my camera for the Hangouts,
Okay,
so that's
just,
why you can't see me there.
yeah, that's a technical issue. Sorry about that.
Yep, that's all right. Anyway, I mean, do you see my point there, though? That like there's a combination of doing things in this unscheduled, uncoordinated way at the individual aristocratic level, and then it's a different mechanism for the group as a whole.
Yeah, I think it's true that if you're trying to be creative, then sometimes you want to be up at odd hours of the night, or you want to put yourself in new situations, or you even want to isolate yourself from familiar people and only spend time with new people. So that's not conducive to like a military hierarchy. Operationally, it's not going to produce consistent results, but it's going to produce creative results. So on an individual level, I mean, theoretically, you could combine some of these elements together. I mean, we know we can study the history of world leaders, and we can see how they have basically, you might have a leader who's pretty eccentric. Like he wakes up in the afternoon and he goes to sleep in the morning, and he kind of just rambles a lot. But then below him, he has a lot of bureaucrats and secretaries, and these people basically codify and they add regularity to his eccentricities. So there's kind of a filtering process where you can have someone at the top who is this creative eccentric, and then below him are like bureaucrats who then make that into a regular product of information that can be passed on to people underneath. Who you need that translation process, because you can't directly translate that creative genius to masses of people. You need to have some kind of translation process where it's made into a regular package that people can digest. So when we're talking about all this, yeah, the first thing is to implement it in not an egalitarian way, but just in an informal way. You can't. I mean, the problem with, and I brought this up, I think, in my thread on mythology, was the difference between kind of an artificial cult and an organic cult. Will just, someone will write a book about Scientology, for example, and then push it wholesale as this fully developed structure, whereas a religion builds organically up. And so we can talk about this and theorize about it, but you can't implement it 100% from the start as this fully developed product. It has to start off kind of in a casual way, and then as you gain members, and I think we looked at your kind of pyramid structure of how you would have kind of different tiers of people, and each tier would then communicate to two people under them and two people under them. And that geometric model is well suited when you have a large number of people trying to filter down a message from the top to the bottom. When you're starting off, I think right now on the forum, it's like 8 people or something. It's mostly just about, we're all at a certain level of discourse. So there, as far as IQ testing, that's not the most necessary thing at this point. It's mostly just participation. Who can, I know everyone's schedule is different, but who can make the time to, even if you can't make the live stream, you make a comment on the video later, or you make a comment on the forum. I've been trying to add something every day, respond to people, and if you can do something like that with an area that you're interested in, or come up with an area that you think other people might be good at answering your questions. I need a very well-defined organizational structure just to be like, hey, I'm going to report on, as you can even do it as you're reading it. You can create a thread and say, here's chapter 1, here's a synopsis of chapter 1, or here's some interesting quotes from chapter 1 that might be relevant or that piqued my interest. So you can start off very basic like that. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can just skim through on Wikipedia articles and, again, boil them down, information out there, which is, benefit and also a problem, because much of it is distracting and actually takes away from our ability to focus on what's important. So if you can take, for instance, I know there have been various projects like Metapedia that basically tried to be a copy of Wikipedia, take Wikipedia and then boil down the articles, edit them, add on to them. And you can do things like that and start small with little projects like that. Once you show that you're willing and capable to do those kinds of tasks, then eventually you can see, other people can see what you're good at, what you're interested in, and start assigning you tasks. So once then you have that relationship of, I'm a person who's producing, and then you have people who are requesting and then consuming that information, then you at least have the basis of what could then become a hierarchy of people being assigned tasks that they wouldn't necessarily think of doing them themselves. But because you're within that hierarchy, then it's the redistribution of the executive function. And that's kind of, I think, on an informational level, this process is this development or progression is kind of the natural one that I think is probably going to be the best chance going forward of making something concrete that isn't street fights or flash mobs or waving the American flag or something like that.
Right. I think where we are right now is that people have to be persuaded that they have to take on obligations, like obligations to provide content that is a thesis, so to put forward positive content, and also obligations to provide feedback on content. And that has to be structured within some kind of time frame, a parameter, a rhythm of how this operates. And I think it's obvious that this is necessary. Any successful organization does this. And, from the beginning, I think the most logical way to do it is simply to leave it, like presuppose that each of us is the aristocratic type and allow complete freedom of what you cover, right? Just provide some positive material, whether it is a synopsis of a book, whether it is a political theory, a piece of literature, whatever it is. You put it out on your specified time frame. So maybe, you are the one who puts something out on Friday, right? And then everyone else has an obligation to provide feedback on that in terms of a concrete evaluation. And then over several cycles of this, it allows for a rank order, and then that can transition into a broader system. Another way of looking at it would be, what do we actually need? We need a codified organizational structure, which in actual terms means a schedule of duties, which amounts to, there's two functions in the duties: what you feedback on and what you put out. And also, like, a way of putting that would be information gathering, information processing. So it's a schedule of events. And when this is codified, when you have an organizational structure, you can build a website where someone goes on the website and they see, like, your main page and it says sign up, and you provide information in that sign up, and it sorts you. It puts you in a domain relevant to your interests, and then it gives you immediately, this is what is expected of you. Not just, and I see that Rattle said like one post per day is like a normal thing for some forums, and it might be doable, it might work to keep people engaged. My own feeling is that that will create more noise than signal. And I think that the problem is too much noise. The problem is too much information, and there's a lot of redundancy in the information that's being put out. Whereas if you limit it to like, actually, no, you're not allowed to post more than once per week when it's your actual task. I'm not saying that this is how we're going to run the forum that Ken set up. I think right now that's just a good place to kind of discuss possibilities. But yeah, what needs to be determined is organizational structure, which means that this can be the material that's put out. So what this would look like is, you say that there's 10 people we're starting out with that want to give this a shot. What you would do is set up a recurring schedule of 10 days where each person puts out positive material each day. Or not each person, but one person puts out positive material each day of the 10-day cycle. And each day, every other person provides their feedback and evaluation. And when the cycle resets, we can do synthesis. I mean, there's different ways of structuring this, but you get my idea. Like, all we would have to do is establish a rank order so that when we determine who ranks highest in one cycle of formulating the theory of organization, then that can be implemented in the next cycle, right? So it's a self-modifying organizational paradigm where the objective is providing theoretical organizational models. We provide a mechanism for ranking these by peer review, and then once we determine the highest, then that sets the actual implementation, and this is testable. So like each cycle, you get new information and you test out new things. Now that inherently is subject to some fragility, in that the downside is someone establishes a paradigm that like makes people lose interest. That's why these sorts of things fail, is that it turns people off at an emotional level, which is bringing it back to where we are right now. Is people have to be persuaded. People have to understand that we have to set down duties, and those have to appear in an actual schedule. People don't want to do this though. And I've experienced this many times. People lose interest, and I just want to say very frankly, if somebody doesn't do this, if we don't set up a concrete organization that is evolutionary and has the ability to scale and has the ability to redistribute our executive function, how we use our time, we're going to lose. We're going to die out. We're literally going to die. Our people is no more unless this can happen. Now, the people who will persist are the people who have coherent organizational structures. So like the Mormons, maybe, but they're going to become multicultural anyway. Like the Amish, they might survive. But even then, like they don't have weapons. And if the government ever decides to abolish freedom of religion, like when the new monocult comes out, global monocult, there'll be no more. So yeah, I don't know exactly how to persuade people that this is necessary. Let me just get like some feedback, if possible. The people who are here, people just don't like to be told what to do, right? And who are you? You're just some person. Now, I don't care what form it takes. So going way back, like I always thought that I would be really good at organizing how people run society. This was because I was convinced that public education was not intelligently designed, and I knew that there were better ways of doing it. And so, for a long time, I just wanted to be in that kind of political role, intelligently designing systems. But I kind of came to realize, like, why does someone accept that authority? And what is the role that democracy or republicanism, what's the role of those political organizations? It's to kind of cajole people into accepting responsibilities, accepting the allocation of the executive function above themselves. It's convincing people to sacrifice freedom, and that entails some level of like sublimation of your own ego. It requires like an acceptance of a moral proposition, really, is what it comes down to. Which is why this all takes place, theorizing this takes place within a religious kind of framework. Because ultimately, when you tell someone this is what we should do, you're tacitly asking them to accept a whole series of metaphysical, ethical propositions. And that the way it happens organically, like this is what I'm proposing now, is that we accept that there's a certain schema, there's a structure, and that's kind of the idea with perennialism. There's an inherent truth, a schematic of the way religion forms. The same thing with organization, institutional structure. There are certain things it has to do. So, and I've tried to outline them. It needs to redistribute the executive function. So, can we all agree that one of the prerequisites, one of the obligations of an organizational framework is that you have some people make decisions for some other people? Like, without that, really, there's no organization. That is a sine qua non of an organizational structure. You have to have information gathering. Otherwise, the organization is blind. You have to have information processing, otherwise the organization is dumb. You have to have a constellation of interests motivating people to continue to participate. They have to think of it as in their best interest. That seems like a psychological prerequisite. And then persistent communication so that you preserve the integrity of the signal over time. So there has to be an actual schedule of events. To my mind, these are like the bare bones of what an organizational structure requires. And so this is where we are. I say this is necessary, and there's a myriad of ways we can experiment with this sort of structure. We can even use these principles as a basic theoretic ground, and then, as I discussed, by reiteratively formulating new theoretical additions to the model and then implementing them in cycles, then we can kind of coalesce on a paradigm that all of us have had feedback on formulating. All of us have had input on. Because if I just come out and build my system, build my website, and say, this is what it's going to be, this is what all of you are going to have to do, even if I'm not in charge, people will still not want to participate because they have their own ideas, and that's fine. But so what I'm asking for right now in the chat, I just want to experiment because people don't like being told what to do. Can you tell me, are these 5 basic principles of organizational structure, are they legitimate? Are they illegitimate? Is there, name one if you can that we can drop and still be effective? Or is there an additional prerequisite of an organizational structure that I missed? So I'll wait and see. But I'm just kind of, I'm dumbfounded. Nick is in the same kind of mood right now, a hopelessness. And it's because people are just very, very difficult to organize. And I think it's a factor of the age that we're living in. But anyway, well, I'm going to see if anybody takes that up and comments on it. But what are your thoughts on that, Ken?
Yeah, I think part of it is there's a basic lack of trust and sense of in-group. So, it's almost like we've come to a point where, you look at various leaders that have come and go, but it doesn't just have to be the alt-right, but of course you can look at the alt-right and see how people came out and they made bold proclamations about life or death. They talked about empires and they talked about going to space. And at the end of the day, they really couldn't even survive a year of organizational action of actually implementing their ideas at the first step, the smallest level. And you see that, and you see the personal faults of people. And so there's a lot of disillusionment that people have, this protection, because you have a society based on, I brought this up on the form of insider trading is one of the biggest, but that doesn't matter. So insider trading, scamming people, the lottery, there's so many scams out there that people, the only way to survive in this kind of culture is you have to be very cynical of people telling you what to do. You have to be very wary about people coming along and telling you this is how you should live your life, because otherwise you're going to be crushed very quickly. This is what happens to a lot of young people, where they're told that, drugs are cool, or, you should, it can be a lawyer, and you find out that the way things are set up, it might be a horrible way to live your life. Just, you're earning a lot of money, but otherwise you have to be wary of this, and people have to be cynical alive. You can't be an open and trusting person. You can't just say, well, that person seems like they know what they're talking about, therefore I'm going to go along with what they're saying. And another example, Peterson, I was just thinking the other day, I watched a parody video where he's talking about, or someone's doing an impression of him talking about Burger King, and how the Burger King is an instantiation of like the philosopher king in the provider role. And I'm listening to this, I'm like, how did we come to a point where people are listening to Jordan Peterson as a guru on masculinity, when he is one of the most effeminate, depressed, like just sullen, pathetic, men that I can think of off the top of my head? Like, he's so defensive and so apologetic in the way that if he ever has a debate, the only debates I've seen that are good with him are with women. But whenever he's against another man, he's always so apologetic and defensive. Millions of young men who look at him and listen to what he has to say, even if it's true, okay, put aside the truth value of his claims. But when he talks about, this is what it means to be a man, this is the difference between men and women, it's like, what right does he have to talk about that when he is the way he is? So there's a huge problem in terms of, you no longer have organic communities. You no longer have a overarching religious structure to society. A lot of the things which you could call it social trust if you want, but a lot of the things that built up that social trust that allowed people to be able to use their instinct. We want society set up in such a way as people can kind of just do what feels right and it turns out okay. You don't want a society where we have now, where if you just do what feels right or go by your instincts, a lot of the times you're led down a very bad path, because we've set up our advertising structures and our cultural structures so that if you do what feels good in the moment, you're going to screw yourself over. That's because we've removed a system of benefits and penalties for different moral actions. And we've just said, hey, it's a jungle out there. It's a libertarian free market. If you hurt yourself, that's on you. That's your responsibility, versus a patriarchal, sort of a patronizing society, which says, yeah, you're allowed to have fun, but we're going to define kind of what fun is and what good fun is and what bad fun is. And we're going to have punishments for certain kinds of behaviors. And I don't care if it hurts other people or not. If you're hurting yourself, you're not actually allowed to hurt yourself. So we've removed all that. And the result is that people don't trust anyone. And even if you listen to someone and it sounds like they know what they're talking about, or it sounds like they want to help you, you still have to be cagey. And you don't want to waste your energy following them. I think in the 1960s was the last time that you had a youth culture that was optimistic about the world and that was willing to just kind of jump into all these new cults that were springing up, because you still had that vestigial social trust from previous eras that people said, hey, it sounds like what they're saying is good. They have a positive message. I'm going to join now with someone like Charlie Manson and wising up to the fact that no, just because good and they say they're looking out for your best interest, it's not, and you have to be guarded. And so the result is that we're all very suspicion, anything that's an investment of our time. We'd rather waste our time. It's like we'd rather the devil we know than the devil we don't know. We'd rather waste our time playing video games than theoretically, because we know what's going to happen. You play a video game and nothing productive happens. You've just wasted your time. Whereas, you try to join a forum or join an organization or become involved or active. And I can say from personal experience that I've also had this problem where I try to join something that I think a lot of, and then everything that I've done is destroyed. Basically, it goes up in ashes because someone decided this wasn't productive for them, or it wasn't worth their time, or it wasn't worth the sacrifice of their personal safety, or whatever. It all goes up in smoke. And you sit back and you look at that and you say, well, why bother getting involved at all? Because things come, things go, and there's no point to it. So I fully understand and I sympathize with that sentiment. But at some point, it is true that if it's not done successfully by someone, it doesn't matter if it's this iteration by us or someone else, but someone has to do it. If you do not have this kind of a system, because that destroying these systems of organization for normal people, for everyday average people, the billionaires, they have their own systems of organization that work for them. And that's why they're succeeding, and that's why they're in control. Sovereignty is gained through organization. If you don't have organizational capacity, then you do not have sovereignty. Then you are, by definition, you have to achieve some kind of potential for organization. I don't know if my internet has gone dead here, but I'm going to check the stream.
I think it's still good. I mean, it was pretty poor audio quality. If you want, next time you start speaking, go ahead and turn your camera off. That'll probably help.
Okay.
But what Gedge says, the alt-right came from pull, which is the opposite of explicit hierarchy. While hierarchy is needed, the people who share these ideas are comfortable with independence and anonymity, which is true. And that's why in the past I've said the alt-right is an anarchic movement. It's an anarchist movement, and many of us were explicitly anarchists not too long ago. And there's probably a temperamental reason for that. And then let alone the fact that, fringe politics attracts neurotic people. It attracts eccentric people, antisocial, sociopathic people often. And these are the kind of people who don't get along in hierarchies, who haven't gotten along in the mainstream, maybe didn't get along with people in school, and so they don't trust people. It's like a dog who's been abused. When you go to pet them, even though you have good intentions, they might, jump out and bite you or run away or whatever it is. And that's the alt-right, which is really sad. But we can't change it. We have the people we have. So how can you build a network that assimilates these kinds of people? Well, one of the things you can do is make sure that, yes, they have obligations to provide positive and negative content, which is what people provide anyway, right? Or at the bare minimum to provide that feedback, and it has to be on a schedule. But as long as it's open to their discretion, like, this is what you can do. So in a college, like, in reality, what you can learn at a university is very restricted. There are many things that they're simply not going to teach you. And what they do teach you is filtered through their message. But you get there and you look at the course catalog and it looks like they have everything, right? And so that gives you an illusion of freedom. So when someone comes to this infrastructure, this organizational network, they have to perceive that they have many options for fulfilling their own desires of how they gather information and how they provide feedback on that information. So this is something that really just has to be designed. Now, the problem is if we get someone who's good with programming and web design to build a specific website to perform this function, that website can always be taken down. So you need a redundancy in the structure, and that's all like technical know-how, which kind of brings me to this issue. Like, I have a democratic instinct, probably because of Germanic ancestry, right? You do rally around a chief, but everything, like consensus, is continually generated through discussion. The reason why parliamentary government emerged in England and the rest of Northern Europe isn't because of the influence of Roman republicanism or Greek democracy. It's because of the influence of the Germanic folk assembly thing. And I have that instinct, and I really do want to fulfill it. So anyway, but I think that might be in contradiction to the way that networks of communication actually organically form. And Max Weber talks about this as essentially always starting from one charismatic person who has a vision. And it's very rarely philosophically explicit. It's more so just a collection of aphorisms which kind of ties together something like a worldview, something like an ethos, and that person has followers, actual physical attendants, who then generate a set of norms of community out of that communal experiment. Which is why in the past, knowing that, and knowing that I'm not the most charismatic person, I stumble over my words and stuff, and I'm just awkward a lot of the time, so I'm not that, but knowing that that's the formula, it's kind of what has to happen. I was under the impression that what we need is to experiment with community, actual physical community, and from that then a possibility of a larger institutionalized structure might happen. So Max Weber says initially the charisma of an individual attracts followers. Those followers generate communal norms, and then they inherit the prestige of the charismatic figure when he departs the scene. Usually he's killed. And those followers then basically get followers of their own. That's like the apostolic tradition, the people who were witness to the original charismatic guy. And then in like the third generation, because no one has like the direct connection to the initial source of prestige, the norms established around the initial source of prestige acquire their own prestige, and this is when you get into like formal legalism as the basis of community organization, and that's what happens as the start of churches. So, if that was the case, what I would have to do, like knowing that, I would have to either find someone who is charismatic and then be attendant on them, or I would have to be that. Now, I have to basically just presume that that's not the case, because that's not very actionable, or at least it hasn't seemed actionable. But then carrying it into this more like electronic space, maybe what's necessary is simply building the system, building the website, and then getting people on. I'd like to start it as a forum activity, as like a very simple heuristic for how to generate the rhythm of the signal, right? So set your feedback and output obligations, set your days that you're responsible for, and run the experiment. Or at the very least, like have, and I used to do this as well, have like a group chat, a group conversation, anonymously once every week. But even that level of organization seems to be a challenge. So I don't know, I'm kind of like at the same time optimistic that there's a lot of potential here, and very pessimistic in that unless things are neatly wrapped up, I think people tend to fall away from these sorts of experiments. I wonder, that just makes me wonder how many social networking sites with alternative paradigms were experimented with. How many had to fail for Facebook to succeed? I wonder. So, Ken, are you still there? I know we're having technical issues today. I'm not sure, honestly, if I want to keep this stream up because we have had so many issues with the audio. Ken, go ahead and jump in when you hear what Gedge.
Yeah, I know there was MySpace and let me, if I have this on. Okay. The question of how many times someone has tried to... Yeah, the question of how many times someone has to start something before it actually, I mean, there was Ask Jeeves and then Ask.com, Yahoo.com. So, there's a lot of different iterations that were all going toward the thing that Google is now. And so they were basically all trying to converge on the winning model, and they were all seeking out the same thing. I just don't, I've seen a lot of forums come and go, and they all presented themselves. It seemed like the end goal, like the start and end of each of them, was this is a place for discussion. This is a place to talk. And that was the start and the end of it. And the question of advancement was, well, how many users can we get, or can we get really quality posts or something? And that's very simple because it doesn't really require any defined hierarchy. It doesn't require any discipline. It's all completely voluntary, and that is it jives well with the internet. It's when you, like, in a face-to-face conversation, if you tell someone I commit to do something and then you don't do that, it's very embarrassing to then have the follow-up conversation of, well, why didn't you do the thing you said you would do? Whereas if you make an anonymous post on the internet saying, I'm going to do something, and you don't do it, well, so what? You don't have to have an awkward conversation. And that is the power of doing things in real life, is that there are basically evolutionary instinctual structures within the individual that exist for the maintenance of tribes and groups and organizations. They exist. I mean, everyone basically has that inbuilt follower mechanism to one extent or another. And then people also, it's more rare, but almost everyone is descended from leaders at some point in your ancestry. So you have a mix of both, genetic structures, the leadership archetype and the follower archetype. But that really only gets activated with, body language and the sense of charisma that you get when you're actually talking to people. And so having internet posts, I agree, it would actually make more sense to have a physical community, and from that physical community then sort of proselytize using the internet as an extension of the physical community out into the virtual world in order to pull more people in or to interact with the wider culture or something like that. That makes more sense from an evolutionary perspective. Now, given the fact that I don't have that, but it is very easy to create a forum or something like that, we can at least discuss what things might be like. And I, as I said, I am committing to doing a podcast every week, and I am committing to responding to posts on the forum and to, creating a new post every other day or so, and trying to, just put out things to see what people are interested. Like, people kind of were interested, it seemed, in World War II, which I typically don't talk about, but you can study that. People seem to be interested in question of mythology and, like, what would be the basis of, like, any rational, or I don't know if I should even say rational, but what would be the basis of, like, an organic religious structure? What is the world that we live in, and what are the options available? So yeah, I mean, I would like to, I have a thread there that says post if you're interested. And I think I'm going to create something that says, choose a day of the week that you are willing to post something. And of course, you don't have to wait. Like, if your day is Tuesday, you don't have to do nothing until Tuesday and then come up with something on Tuesday. You can come up with something on Saturday and just save it until Tuesday and post it on Tuesday. But then you have your own day and you post something, And at this point, I wouldn't really put any very, impressive standards on what it would have to be. It could be a few paragraphs or something. But, you post your own thread on that day, and then everyone else who has committed to a day. So let's say you have a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So then the Monday, Wednesday, Thursday people are obligated to respond when it's not their day. So, they would all be responding to your post on Tuesday and giving their feedback. And I think that's like a pretty simple thing. The question is, will people actually sign up on that rather than I'm just going to lurk and do it whenever I voluntarily feel like doing it is another question.
Well, that seems more likely, I think. I mean, It's not like I'm exempt from this lack of self-discipline, and I'm motivated to do my own kind of thing, but what do I do on my own time? I'm reading, like trying to go through Chris Langan's CTMU again. I'm reading the book by Sheldrake on morphic resonance. I'm like, these are fringe interests, and then I play the piano and the French horn, and I have my own interests that aren't necessarily compatible seemingly with this kind of cooperative enterprise. Like, I'm a member of several Discord chats, and I know that Discord is compromised, but whatever, it's what's out there, it's what people are using. And but I've never really been a message board kind of person. I don't get the point of it. Like, it seemed from the beginning kind of intrinsically useless, and it's like it does generate a lot of noise. It does have the ability to provide a culture, but how, as what Gedge points out, there's a community, but how to make them act collectively. It's not something that you can convert into action. It's not something that lends itself to the distribution of the executive function. And if it does that, it does so deceptively or in a hidden way. And what I mean by that is that the culture kind of smuggles in moral propositions without ever asking you to accept them explicitly, like a religion does. Like a religion says, will you convert to this worldview? Like, this is now what you believe, and these are the implications of this belief. With a forum culture or something like that, people just bare repetition of memes kind of slowly reprograms your brain and makes you act differently. And one of the reasons why I'm skeptical of that is that that's exactly the kind of crap that the behaviorists working with the FBI and the intelligence agencies were doing. That's what they studied, how to manipulate crowds. And everything that I see on forums like that, the whole alt-right, for all I know, everything that came out of the last 3 years may have just been a construction of people who know how to tweak social algorithms. Like, whenever it seems decentralized like that, mass social phenomena, like the Arab Spring, it's like there's always someone pulling the levers. It's either it's some far right genius. Like, my first instinct is to look to, maybe the neo-reactionary people are responsible for setting up the culture. I was in this from pretty much the beginning, right? I was on in 2012 making videos and listening to Ryan Falk, making response videos to Ryan Falk, even though he never responded. Back then, and I knew the network of people who were into it. Like, if you're going to look at anyone who pulled the levers on this sort of stuff, it's autists like Ryan Falk and a couple other shadowy circles, but you can't really discount the possibility that intelligence did have a hand. So that's the problem with the meme culture. You don't know who's shaping the culture, and you can't just trust that it's going to lean in a benevolent direction. Like that mimetic culture. And I've seen it. I see it on iFunny, which I use, to kind of, not only because I want to see where the culture is, but also because, sometimes I get bored and some of them are still funny. But iFunny is clearly used to push a certain message, to brainwash people. So all of that stuff is highly weaponizable. And therefore you... Porky, I don't know what this would be a confession about, if you can clarify that. But yeah, so that's why you want to move to an explicit framework. And this is an old neo-reactionary idea, the idea of formalism, that things actually tend to be more benevolent if the roles are formalized. Because it's not that hierarchy doesn't exist in the absence of this, it's that you don't know who's in charge, right? Like somebody's controlling the alt-right. Somebody is. It might be a group of people with disparate interests, right? Maybe a smaller group of very influential people have conflicting influences on the dissident right overall. That's possible. But, the point is somebody is always making those decisions. So looping back to what is the central function of an organizational scheme? The distribution of the executive function. We all make decisions, and we make those decisions under the influence of others, usually people that we respect. But often it's people who we don't even know who we're making our decisions under the influence of. It's a just general social effect of meme culture or forum culture, or what you kind of aggregate as a popular opinion as you watch videos on YouTube or talk to your peers. Porky, I don't think it's Irini. I really don't think it's Irini. Although he was here long before I was, so who knows. But anyway, you need the executive function. It's going to exist. So given that, the real challenge is, how do you determine who gets the authority? Who gets the authority to make decisions? That's one of the central problems of politics. And the divine right of kings is obviously an attractive, simple solution. God chose somebody and they have the ultimate authority, and then all the rest of the authority kind of spills down through his attachés and his delegates, and until you get to the level of the serf, where they don't really have authority over anyone except for their family. And then the husband has authority over the wife and over the children. The wife has authority over the children. So that's the distribution of the executive function. It's central to a conservative worldview. But we can't decide on what that entails. We can't decide what entitles somebody to have that authority. One solution is simply the media-driven platform, which is what we end up doing, which is you don't have any obligations when you start following someone on YouTube or whatever. You just watch them. They end up, in actual fact, influencing your decision-making. So it's like a partial and hidden redistribution of your executive function, but you never actually accept it, and you also get conflicting signals from other media platforms. So an improvement on that would be you have a network of, or rather a set of networks, a set of organizational schemes that you can subscribe to. This is also a neo-reactionary idea that goes hand in hand with formalism. And it's often kind of conceived of as government done by corporate services. So all government services are things that a corporation could in theory provide, and so basically you subscribe to a corporate entity which provides all those things. And this doesn't have to be at the level of government, and it can also be at this social media, social organization level. And if you have several of those networks, well, that already kind of exists, right? You can go and join the TRS forums, you can go and join one physical community, at least, Cascadia, or any of the various discords. They have their rules, but as far as I've seen, there's none that I'm aware of that formalize obligations on a periodic basis. And that's a prerequisite, in my opinion, for actually forming a cybernetic structure that enables to make an organism out of the collection. See, that's what is the difference between a mob and a political group. The political group acts as an organism. Information is integrated. It's able to process signals and get feedback and redistribute the executive function. That is what you have to have. That's what all successful political movements have. And I don't see any currently. And, correct me if I'm ignorant, right? Maybe there's somebody out there who has this. But once again, because a couple of people are probably here who weren't before, the 5 pillars of any successful organizational structure are distribution of the executive function. That's a sine qua non. It can't exist at all without that. It's not an organizational structure. Information gathering, information processing, constellation of interests, and persistent communication. Constellation of interests is there to bind people to conceive of a common destiny. It provides the glue, the in-group. What also provides that is persistent communications, because the way we psychologize in-group has to do with who you talk to often. Like Dunbar's unit, the 150 people that we can internally conceive of as human beings, essentially, as persons, that is just based on who you spend the most time with. You have like 5 people that you spend a lot of time with, and they are the most real. They're like your family group. And then beyond that, it dwindles. But persistent communication is what builds in-group. It's not political ideology. It's not what you believe. It's not shared beliefs. It's shared time. And how you spend time is the executive function. It's how you make decisions. So all of these are related to each other, I hope you can see. But if anyone has some feedback on those 5 pillars, what I'm inclined to do currently, because I am getting a little flustered, just the fact that I've been out talking about what's necessary for 6 years, and granted, I wasn't always in the exact same circles I'm in today, and just seeing it constantly go past people, and people constantly opt for their own optionality, their own freedom. And even when they ideologically say, like, no, we don't want freedom, we don't want anarchy, we want authority, we want hierarchy. They say this, but people don't actually commit to any level of formalism, by and large, unless it's a media-driven narrative, because that's what we're comfortable with, that's what we're familiar with. But whatever, you just gotta adapt, try again, and it's like the myth of Edison with the light bulb. And that's kind of where I am. So my inclination then is to formalize an initial set of rules that's very, very simple, using those 5 pillars as the first round of an organization. And the second round, or rather, that sets the parameters for the first round. Obligations will entail formalizing yourself, feedback on the structure that I outline, or saying like, no, that needs to be scratched and this is what we need to do instead. Then do a rank sorted vote, which means you do one round of voting that's purely egalitarian, purely democratic, and then re-rank the votes retrospectively on the basis of who got the most. So the person with the most votes, their vote is weighted more. That's how to overcome the problem of like, you don't want the average person making the decisions because they're not the most discerning. So that'll be my premise. And this is, I think, just what I'm going to have to do. We'll try to run it on the forum, see if we can get that going. Once more, and I probably will, just so you know, I probably will take this stream down because of the audio issues, and this is really more like talking about what we want to do with the forum than ideological content. We probably need to discriminate, or rather like segregate these domains. But anyway, for those of you who are here listening to what I'm saying right now, what I'm planning to do then is to outline the dynamics of how you put forward your feedback and new organizational models. And I'll say right now, it's the simplest thing I can think of to say that however many people we have, whoever says that they're willing to do this, each person is assigned a day to complete their model by. And what you're responsible for doing is providing a schematic for organization, for modeling, theorizing institutional structure. And at the end of that period, we do the rank sorted vote, and somebody comes out on top. And that person then they transform their theory into an operationalization. Jesus, how do I say this word in this tense? Operationalizable. That's why, because it's like impossible. They have to translate it into that so that then this can be run as a script, essentially. And that'll be the next round, and we can repeat this, and if new people come in, then we simply extend the period. Like if you have 20 people, that's a 20-day cycle, and each of those days, people put feedback on each person's contribution in a forum setting. Like these can be threads, each person can have their own thread, and all of that specifics we can do. But if you want to do this, then you can jump in to the forum, say you're interested, and we'll assign you your day. If you, in the interested section, say I'm in, we'll send you when you have to provide your model by. And I'll write out like a script for how we're going to organize this. And it's the simplest possible thing. And that's, I think, just what I'm inclined to do. Now, Ken, are you back yet? You might be muted. You might... No, I'm still on my own. So I'm going to bring the forum up.
Oh, I'm also here.
Okay, yeah.
I just had a 10-second delay. I just posted a thread saying maybe, I mean, you could do it saying we're going to assign you a day, but it's kind of, at this point, there's 4 identifiable people. I was going to say, hey, first come, first serve. And so I just wrote down Monday. I mean, if someone else wanted to do Monday, we could switch, but there's 6 other days in the week. Choose your day. And then when it's you, I set a low bar standard of you have to respond to other people's posts within 5 days. So before your day, or maybe it would be 4 days. I don't really know the exact thing there. So if someone, if your schedule works out so that really you can only do Saturday, although again, you could come up with your thread at any point during the week. You're just not allowed to post it until your day, so that we have a consistent frequency. It's not like everyone posts on Monday and then there's a bunch of noise and it's impossible to get feedback if people do that. So I will hold off until Monday. And then if you have several ideas, great. You just came up with several weeks of material, and then you can work on a long-term project. Like if you come up with 4 threads, then you're set for the month, and you can take that month to make a really quality, project, and then present that the next time you have an opportunity.
Yeah. The model needs to be evolutionary, and I'll go ahead then tomorrow, so by Sunday at some point, I'll put up that initial, how it's going to run, and I'll probably cooperate with Ken on actually the details of that. But Henning Binderup says, not simple enough. So Henning, what can we do to simplify this, and how can we get this started? Because it is an experiment I'd like to run. In the description is the address for the forum. So in the I'm interested section, say that you're interested, and we will reply to you, and either you post a day that you're going to put your content up by. So you say Tuesday, you say Wednesday, check to make sure the days are open. And it doesn't have to be just 1 week. We can do this over any N can be the number for the period. And we can adjust that in the future, but just to get it started, I think this is the best paradigm. So I don't know if, Ken, you heard me that I don't think I'm going to keep this stream up because of the audio issues and the fact that it's kind of technical talk about what we plan on doing on the forum. But necessary nevertheless, I think, to have this today. But what do you think about that? Discriminating ideological content on these streams versus what we're doing on the forum.
Yeah, probably people do enjoy more that we talk about content rather than structure. And I think that's pretty typical for audiences. It does. I mean, I'm not sure everyone heard about it. I just posted it as a response to a comment on the last stream. So
yeah. You know what I'll do then?
People didn't see it.
What I'll do is I will put a short video with a PowerPoint presentation, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, of how this experiment is going to work, what they have to do to get in, and that'll constitute what I promised for tomorrow. So that'll be like a 5 or 10 minute video. It'll have the link for the forum, and the experiment will run from there. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, since we're not going to post this... Yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, looking at quick stats, in 24 hours, we had about 3 people or 4 people maybe log on, and then 21 people who were just lurking.
Yeah,
So
which
people
is
who
good
didn't log
because
onto an account.
all you did was post it in a comment under the video, so it wasn't even in the description, and we clearly didn't mention it until now in a video. So I think then I'll do a short video. Maybe you can redundantly post it or do your own version if you want on your channel. But that sounds good to me. Now, again, this stream will not be public, people, but if you want to talk about what we've talked about, you can do so on the forum. And I'll give just one last chance to Henning Binderup. He says this model is not simple enough, but it's kind of like the period needs to start, the signal needs to start processing, and this model has to start evolving. And it's just the simplest way I can think to start it. It's also possible in the future to differentiate the function, right? That's important to note. And that provides redundancy and anti-fragility. So you provide kind of an evolutionary model where there's a mechanism for branching into a new species of organization that's still connected by some links, but operates autonomously. And that way, each of those components has the possibility of failure. But when they succeed, they might supplant the older paradigms. Again, Nassim Taleb, if you haven't read it, Anti-Fragility is a really good book. I might do a report on that at some point. Anyway, last thoughts, Ken? Yeah, he's watching with a delay. So it's going to be a second, and then he'll say no last thoughts, and then we'll close up.
Yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah, now you can hear this. Yeah, I will typically say no last thoughts. That is my shtick.
All right, well, that's it then. We'll put those videos up tomorrow, and we'll get this started, and then we'll go back to actual content-based Perennial Podcast stuff next week. So, thanks for being here.
Sounds good.